All right, we're cracking open a file from the Silent Archive for a totally different kind of intelligence briefing. Look, you need to understand that you are living through the most sophisticated land grab in all of human history. But the territory being fought over, it isn't physical land, it's cognitive. This is a war, but it's not for borders, it's for your consciousness.
This quote right here, this is the central finding from the archive. I know it's a jarring idea, but it's absolutely essential if you want to understand the world we're all living in right now. When you're scrolling, you're not just, passing the time. There is a strategic process underway, and its goal is to annex your mind.
So, let's be honest. You probably feel like your distraction is some kind of personal failure, right? A simple lack of willpower. But what if I told you that's not what's happening at all? The archive's analysis is crystal clear on this. Your attention is an incredibly high-value geopolitical asset. And that feeling of distraction you have, that's the actual sensation of that asset being captured.
Okay, so this conflict, it needs a name. And in the archive, we call it the cognitive land grab. See, global powers aren't just fighting for physical borders anymore. They are fighting for something the archive calls the Thalamic Gate, which is basically the front door, the central relay station to your consciousness. Your personal sovereignty, that's the new battleground. Now don't picture some big, dramatic invasion. This is more like a war of 1,000 cuts, fought second by second. Think of it this way. Every single time your focus gets pulled away by some external algorithm, a tiny piece of your cognitive territory, your actual ability to think for yourself, is being annexed. So, if your attention is being annexed, how exactly does that happen? What are the mechanics of capture? Okay, this is where our briefing gets a little more technical. We're going to break down the actual strategies being used in this new kind of warfare.
Believe it or not, the archive pretty much defines this entire era with a single equation. This right here is the fundamental law of cognitive warfare. It's the formula for what they call capture velocity. And trust me, understanding this is absolutely key to seeing how your focus is being targeted.
Okay, let's break this down. Capture velocity is basically the speed at which your attention can be grabbed. Now, the most important variable here is E. That stands for entropy. The goal of pretty much any external algorithm is to maximize your mental chaos, your confusion. And why would they do that? Well, it's simple. A mind that's in a state of high chaos has no defenses up. It's incredibly easy to capture.
And this is exactly how they pump up that chaos. It's called the bottom-up hijack. So first, your system gets flooded with all this high-frequency, low-meaning stuff. The endless scroll. This whole flood is designed to bypass what the archive calls your prefrontal governance, which is like the rational CEO of your brain. And then comes the hijack. These signals start talking directly to your most primitive survival circuits, and that keeps you in this state of constant, low-level alarm.
So, this brings us to the consequences. What does it actually feel like to live on the losing end of this war? What happens when your cognitive territory has been successfully occupied? Well, the archive has a name for that too. Life in the cognitive colony.
So what is a cognitive colony? It's a state where your reality, it isn't really built by you anymore. It's pre-rendered and served up to you by outside forces. In this new kind of social structure, you basically become what the archive calls a data peasant. It's like you're a tenant farmer just living on digital land that's owned by these huge algorithmic landlords.
And this, right here, is the ultimate price we pay for all this constant fragmentation. It's not just about being distracted. It is the total liquidation of your sovereign self. Your ability, your capacity to form independent, deep thoughts, it just dissolves.
Okay, let's make this really personal for a second. In the archive, power is measured by a very specific metric: your duration of undisturbed thought. So I have a direct question for you. Can you hold a single, focused line of intent for 60 minutes, 1 hour, without any interruption?
Now, if your answer to that is no, then I have to tell you, your cognitive territory has already been occupied. This is not some future threat we're talking about. The war isn't coming, it's not at the gates, it is already inside.
But here's the thing. Just knowing you're occupied, that's the first step to liberation. So the big question is, how do you fight back? Well, the archive provides very clear protocols for what it calls active fortification. It is time to build your sovereign firewall.
All right, here's the 3-step protocol. Step 1, algorithmic resistance. You have to intentionally feed the algorithms confusing, contradictory data, noise, to make your behavior impossible to predict. Step 2, the information embargo.
You need to create sacred blackout zones in your day with Euro-external signals. This lets your mind do its essential structural maintenance. And finally, step 3, the thalamic audit. You have to become the active, vigilant gatekeeper of your own mind.
Let's zoom in on that third step, because this is a tool you can start using literally right now. From this moment on, think of every single notification not as a message, but as a diplomatic incursion trying to cross your border. Before you let it in, just perform this quick 2-second audit. Ask yourself, is this providing any real structural value to my thinking, or is this just noise designed to capture me?
So what's the end goal here? What's the point of all of these protocols? It's to achieve true cognitive sovereignty. Your mind, it shouldn't be some public square, open and vulnerable to every person who passes by. It should be an impenetrable fortress, a private sanctuary of deep thought and silence that you control, especially in a world that is just screaming for your attention.
Because once you've actually built that fortress, your entire relationship with reality flips upside down. You stop being a passive consumer who just reacts to the world, and you become an active creator. You don't just react to the news anymore. You, your thoughts, your sovereign reality, you are the news. So the final question is, are you a colony or are you a fortress?
All right, let's get right into it. The most sophisticated, most ambitious land grab in human history is happening as we speak. But the territory being seized, it isn't physical land with borders and flags, it's cognitive territory. We're talking about your mind.
And this quote just nails the core idea, doesn't it? That thing you do, that moment of distraction where you're just scrolling through a feed. Well, according to our source material, that is a micro-annexation of your mental sovereignty. It's a quiet, invisible colonization, and it's happening second by second.
So, we really need to reframe this whole thing. That feeling of being unable to focus, that's not some personal failure, it's not a simple lack of willpower. You're actually on the front line of a massive, systemic, geopolitical struggle where your attention has become an incredibly valuable asset. Here's the clinical definition we're working with: cognitive annexation. The argument from the source is that the big powers aren't really fighting over physical borders anymore. They're fighting for what it calls the thalamic gate. Now, your thalamus is basically the sensory relay station for your brain, and if you can control that gate, well, you control the very entry point to someone's consciousness. That is the new battleground.
Now, what's so powerful about this is how it contrasts what we tell ourselves with this new geopolitical reality. You might think, I'm just distracted. But the clinical reality is that your attention is a resource, and it's being actively mined. You might blame yourself, saying it's a lack of willpower, when, in fact, your cognitive borders are systematically under siege.
And this is where it gets a lot deeper and a lot more personal. See, once those cognitive borders become porous, the consequences turn inward. We're talking about what the source calls the total liquidation of the private self.
We all like to think of ourselves as users of technology, right? But this framework, it suggests a totally different reality. We're data peasants. In this model, you don't own the digital land you inhabit. You're more like a tenant farmer living on territory owned by algorithmic overlords. And every thought, every single preference is harvested like a crop, analyzed, and then sold right back to you in the form of a suggestion.
And all this constant surveillance, this harvesting, it has a direct biological effect. It creates a state of hypervigilance. That endless stream of notifications, what the source calls engagement signals, is designed to keep your amygdala, your brain's threat detection center, in a permanent state of low-level alarm. You're always just a little bit on edge, waiting for that next ping.
And here's the frightening progression. The first step in this internal liquidation is that your very identity, the core of who you are, it stops being yours. It just becomes a tradable commodity, defined by nothing more than your data profile. From there, your sovereign intent, your ability to form your own original thoughts and desires gets replaced. You no longer think. You are thought through by algorithms that serve you a suggested reality, guiding your choices without you even noticing.
And this leads us to the final, and frankly, devastating conclusion. An undefended mind, by age 45, becomes a hollowed-out territory. It's an identity defined entirely by external inputs, a shell that is visible to everyone, but there's no one truly home. The crucial point here is that this is a time-sensitive threat. The clock is ticking. But this isn't just a story of doom and gloom. It's a diagnosis, and every good diagnosis leads to a prescription. So now, we pivot from the problem to the solution. It's time to move from being a passive consumer to an active fortifier of your own mind. Because in this new reality, privacy isn't a luxury. It is your only real defense against total psychological annexation.
This is the core strategy, a three-part protocol designed to help you reclaim your cognitive territory and secure your mental borders. So let's break down each step.
First up is algorithmic resistance. Instead of letting algorithms perfectly predict and contain you, you fight back. You start intentionally introducing noise into your data stream. Go engage with content that has nothing to do with your profile. The goal is to become unpredictable, to break their models, and to essentially become a ghost in their machine.
Next up, the information embargo. This is all about creating blackout zones in your day, dedicated periods with zero external signals. Now, what's really important here is how you frame this. These are not just breaks, they are active border reinforcements. This is the time when you give your prefrontal cortex the space to perform what the source calls structural maintenance, and you can finally ensure the thoughts you're having are actually yours.
The final step is a simple, repeatable action, the thalamic audit. Before you engage with any piece of content, an article, a video, a post, you perform a quick 2-second audit. You just ask this question: is this information adding real structural value to my life? Or is it just a diplomatic incursion, an attempt to annex my attention? If it's noise, you refuse entry. You become the gatekeeper.
So, what's the end goal of all this? It's not just about defending, it's about building. The goal is to achieve what the source calls neural sovereignty, to turn your mind from an occupied territory into an impenetrable fortress. You know, true sovereignty today is the ability to exist in the digital world without being consumed by it.
And this quote just brilliantly illustrates that ultimate state of sovereignty. You shift from being a passive reactor to the world, constantly getting knocked around by the latest outrage or trend, to becoming the active creator of your own reality. You generate the signal instead of just consuming all the noise.
This is the vision, a mind that has built its own reality, one that's independent of the grid, an internal sanctuary of silence in a world that is constantly screaming for your attention. That, right there, is the definition of being sovereign in the modern age.
And that brings us to the final, provocative question this material leaves us with. It's a choice, and it is a time-sensitive one. As you move through life, what are you building? A colony, open to any and all invaders? Or a fortress, carefully guarded and completely sovereign?
And that's our explainer on cognitive annexation. The question isn't whether the battle for your mind is happening, it is. The only question is whether you choose to fight back. And that choice, as always, is yours.